And Mr. Chair, you can open the meeting whenever you're ready.
Fantastic. Good evening and welcome to the Tyngsborough Finance Committee meeting. Today is Tuesday, April 8th, and we can go right to our agenda here. The first item on the agenda is just meeting minutes for March 18th. Can I get a motion to approve minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes of March 18th.
Second.
Second, all in favor of approving minutes, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained, and we are good with those meetings. And moving right along, Colin, I can turn this over to you to run through our warrant articles.
Perfect. Let me just get the warrant articles up. All right. Share screen. All right. Hopefully you can see the warrant articles.
Yep.
All right. So I will basically what we need to do tonight. Last night, the select board voted to post the warrant. So everything that you're seeing on the screen that we'll talk about this evening was already presented to the select board. It was voted on them to post the warrant. And so tomorrow morning, a constable will post it as we're required to do. And the select board also voted their recommendations. As a part of the Finance Committee guidebook, which we'll publish ahead of town meeting, we also asked the Finance Committee to review each individual article and vote whether or not to recommend it. So what I will do is present each article one at a time. I'll answer any questions. And if there are no questions or once we've satisfied the questions, someone on the committee will need to make a motion to either recommend the article and then we would take a vote, or somebody would make a motion to not recommend and then we would take a vote. These votes become a part of our presentation we give at town meeting, and it also gets included in the Finance Committee guidebook. So with that, I will dive right in, and please interrupt me at any point with questions, but I'll stop after each article. All right, so the first item is a special town meeting. It's starting at 7 p.m., same time as we posted the other one, and there's only one warrant article. This is a special town meeting because it deals with reimbursing the budget of the current fiscal year. So in the annual town meeting, we're talking about the budget for a future fiscal year. In a special town meeting is when you discuss the funding for the existing fiscal year. So special town meeting Article 1 is a transfer of funds from the town's general stabilization account to the police department's salary and wages line item. The total amount is $688,180.65. That represents the amount of money that the town was ordered via a court order to pay to a police officer who was victorious in an arbitration case. Arbitration, for those that aren't familiar, is the dispute resolution process that we agreed to with collective bargaining units, particularly public safety. Anytime there's a disagreement, either about interpretation of the contract or discipline, it escalates eventually to a point of arbitration, which is where an independent third party hears the arguments from both the town and the union and ultimately decides in favor of one or the other. In this case, the arbitrator found that during the arbitration, the town did not demonstrate just cause for what was the termination of this officer in 2021. And as such, the town was ordered to pay back wages. The actual payment of the back wages has already been made. Once you receive a court order, you don't need a town meeting appropriation to make the payment. In fact, you have to make the payment no matter what. However, every year we have to close our books in a balanced manner. And so when we close the books in July, the state is going to ask us to demonstrate how we have closed this now existing deficit. Tyngsborough's only real option is to use general stabilization. We don't have a free cash appropriation that matches this amount. So all we're asking town meeting to vote on here is to transfer the $688,180.65 to the salary wages for the police department to simply close out a deficit. If the town meeting doesn't approve this, when we close the books in July, the state's going to make us take the money from a different source anyway.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the approval of Article 1 in the special town warrant.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion?
No, pretty clear.
Well, yeah, this is it's a bookkeeping thing. There's no option really not to do this. So
Yeah.
the way I see it, it needs to be done. So, okay. All in favor of approving Article 1, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, Colin, that is unanimous approval.
Excellent. Moving right along now into the annual town meeting warrant. There are 19 articles that will be considered by town meeting. Many of them are housekeeping. Most of them appear annually, so we'll be able to breeze through some of these. Article 1 is an annual article that asks town meeting to accept the annual town report. We just received the hard copy today. Our town bylaws require that a copy be available at the annual town election and annual town meeting, but we'll post a digital copy of it next week. Every year we ask town meeting to do this, and you're simply accepting the annual town report as printed.
Motion to accept Article 1.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of Article 1, approving, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, that is unanimous.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Article 2 is another annual article. It's deposits to stabilization funds to see if the town will vote to transfer the sum of $150,000 from free cash to the Special Ed Stabilization Fund. The Special Ed Stabilization Fund funds unanticipated or unbudgeted costs of special education, out of district tuition, or transportation. This is an account that we established several years ago to help the school department deal with the unbudgeted cost and unplanned costs of special education. If you paid attention to the tri-board meeting last night, they talked heavily about the financial implications of the cost of providing these services. And so what we've done every year is help offset their operating costs by using a sum of free cash to mitigate that. So Article 2 is the first step in that process. That's taking the money from free cash and putting it into the stabilization fund.
Mhm.
Motion to recommend Article 2.
Second.
Any discussion on Article 2? Hearing none, all in favor of Article, oh, I'm sorry?
No, I was gonna say, because they had said last night that they only got 40-something% instead of the 75% reimbursement. And so they're really hurting. So I think this is a good thing.
Okay. All right, all in favor of Article 2, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 2 is unanimous.
Fantastic. Moving right along to Article 3. Article 3 is the second half of stabilization funds, which authorizes the use of the funding that is in those stabilization funds. So Article 3 seeks to use $900,000 from the Road Stabilization Fund. As we've talked about in previous meetings, the Road Maintenance Stabilization Fund is funded entirely through cannabis excise. So a prior town meeting vote dedicated 75% of cannabis excise to this stabilization fund. That money goes in automatically because of the revenue dedication. And every year we ask town meeting to allocate a certain amount of money to be used for roads projects. In prior years, we would take out about 800,000, but we've never fully spent that account. So there is a surplus in it. And this year, because the general fund budget, which we'll talk about in Article 6, because that doesn't include a contribution to the roads program, we are increasing the request this year from 800 to 900,000. That dollar amount will still not deplete the stabilization fund. We're seeking 177,000 from special ed stabilization. The prior article put $150,000 into it, but there exists a $27,000 balance that was appropriated for this fiscal year that the school committee will not be using. The appropriations are tied to a fiscal year, so if it's not spent in the fiscal year it's authorized, we need a subsequent appropriation. So that 177 is the 150 Article 2 put in there, plus a balance from an appropriation given by town meeting last year. $151,000 from the Capital Asset Stabilization Fund. This item was discussed with the Finance Committee at a previous meeting, a joint meeting with the Capital Asset, but this would fund the purchase of a new backhoe for the Department of Public Works. That item is included and recommended by the Capital Asset Management Committee for fiscal year 26. And then finally, a newer item is the use of debt stabilization to help with the middle school debt payment this year. Last year was the first year we deposited money into debt stabilization. We deposited $200,000, knowing that the first couple of years of the $1 million contribution to the middle school would be difficult. There are a variety of reasons that is the case, primarily because we haven't experienced the new growth from the Toll Brothers project that we had been counting on when we promised the $1 million. The good news is we will get there. The budget is balanced. It includes the $1 million. Our revenue projections are always conservative. And so while I'm comfortable saying that we will exceed our revenue projections as we're on track to do this year, what we have to avoid is finding ourselves in a mid-year deficit in fiscal 26. There exists a lot of uncertainty in the economy right now. And what I would hate for us to be is in November, have already made the debt service payment on the middle school, and then find ourselves in $150,000 deficit. The key item here to keep in mind is that this stabilization account can only be used to fund the debt payment. What that means mechanically is if we find ourselves in November needing a special town meeting to close a budget deficit, that money can't be used because we would have already paid the debt service. And so the purpose for the stabilization fund couldn't be met. What I expect will happen this year, we'll talk a little bit about it in Article 6. We're on track to far exceed our projected revenues, likely in the ballpark of $700,000 to $800,000. I expect being able to recommend in October that $200,000 from free cash that will be certified over the summer be put back into here so that this fund is replenished in time for future budget years if absolutely necessary.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 3 as written.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion?
Nice and clear, Colin, for me.
Thank you.
Here as well. Okay, hearing none. All in favor of approving Article 3, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 3 is unanimous.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving right along to Article 4, this is another annual article that appears on every town meeting warrant. This article does two things. One, it establishes revolving funds. Those are funds inside the general fund that are funded completely through the fees they generate. So it's slightly different than an enterprise fund because they're not business type activities. But for instance, if you look at any of these, it tells you where the fees are collected from and who can spend the money, and that money stays within those programs. Article 4 also sets the spending limit. This year's warrant does not include any new revolving funds, and it does not include any increases or decreases to the spending limit. So if you look at Article 4 on the fiscal year 25 warrant, you'll see the exact same article. This simply allows these dollar amounts to be spent from existing revolving funds.
Chairman, motion to approve Article 4.
Second.
Right, any conversation on Article 4?
No.
No.
Okay, we'll go right to a vote. All in favor of Article 4, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 4 is approved unanimously.
Tremendous. Moving right along to Article number 5. Article number 5 is also a housekeeping item that appears on every single town meeting warrant. This authorizes the select board to enter into contracts in excess of 3 years, specifically for lease or purchase agreements. Under Mass General Law, without an approval of town meeting, the select board is only able to enter into contracts of 3 years. With this vote, we'd be able to enter into contracts of up to 5 years. Most common example of this is our copier leases are typically 5-year leases. That's really the only real current one that I can think of, but this gives the select board the flexibility to do just that.
Colin, do the leases, does it last, is the percentage the same for every year for the continuous 5 years or how does that work?
Great question. It depends on the contract. There are generally escalations built into it. All of the contracts that we enter into, though, are required to include a clause that says it's subject to appropriation. So it's
Mhm.
actually the same for employment agreements. Even though we enter into 3 or 5 year contracts, generally because it works in our favor, we lock down prices. The town always has the ability to cancel the contract if a subsequent town meeting doesn't approve the appropriation required.
Oh, all right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, so can I get a,
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 5 as written.
I'll
Second. All right, got Carol.
perfect? Any further discussion? All right, all in favor of Article 5, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 5 is unanimous.
Fantastic. Moving on to the most exciting item on the warrant this evening. It's Article 6. Article 6 sets the general fund for fiscal year 2026. There are no changes to the budget since the last time you saw it, with the exception that the budget now includes, on the revenue side, under other available sources, the $200,000 from debt stabilization. Certainly, if that item fails, at town meeting, it wouldn't be included in the other available sources, but for the purposes of this budget, it is. The budget for fiscal year 2026, as we've talked about ad nauseum, includes only a handful of new items, most notably $900,000 toward the middle school debt. $100,000 to get us to $1 million is coming from the Lakeview Ave lease, which is outside of the general fund. That money is paid directly to the school department and put in a separate account. Other new items include contractual labor increases. This year's budget sees a 17% increase in health insurance, which we talked about at the tri-board meeting last night. It also sees a 16% increase in our assessment at Greater Lowell Tech, which is a combination of factors. Primarily, we've experienced over the last 2 or 3 years lower than normal increases, so it just makes that, that one-time correction, if you will, a little bit more dramatic. There are no new positions included in this budget except for converting a currently part-time position into a full-time position to support both our police department and our fire department.
Recommend to approve Article 6.
Fantastic,
Second.
perfect. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor of approving Article 6, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, that is unanimous.
Fantastic. Article 7 is compensation of elected officials. This article sets the stipends for all of the elected boards and committees that receive a stipend. It also sets the salary for the one elected full-time employee, which in Tyngsborough is the town clerk.
Just note,
Disclaimer at the beginning, the dollar amounts that you see in Article 7 are included in the budget that was just discussed in Article 6. So these dollar amounts do not represent an increase to the budget, but because town meeting technically sets all of these salaries, they're a separate warrant article. There are no changes to the stipends for the various elected or appointed boards. There is a substantial change, as you'll see, over the requested salary for the town clerk in fiscal year 26, as opposed to the salary set by town meeting for fiscal 25. The town clerk will explain the reasons for an increase. Because it's an elected position, that salary is not negotiated with me or set by me. But in transparency, the logic that the town clerk had in setting forth this request is that ahead of the fiscal 25 budget, we knew we were losing our 20+ year town clerk. And the anticipation was that we would be getting a less experienced clerk. And so our former clerk lowered the salary to reflect that. I think that people have generally had very positive experiences with our new town clerk. And her perspective is that the proposal for fiscal year 26 represents 2 years of a 2% COLA on what was the salary in fiscal 24. Now, in full transparency, because we reduced it in fiscal 25, it represents an 11% increase over that dollar amount. Again, I just wanted to put the arguments out there. I'm not advocating one way or another. The town clerk will, at town meeting, explain her position, but that is the only change that you'll see in Article 7.
So to clarify, going from 69 and change to 77 and change is not all cost of living. There's a raise in there as well. Is that true?
You could look at it either way. That dollar amount change represents an 11% increase. Certainly 11% is not the cost of living increases that every other employee received. I think that the perspective of the town clerk is that it's a market adjustment because the salary was previously more in line with the requests that she has submitted for this year.
So is
And I-
that the previous, approximately the previous salary plus 2% COLA increases?
Correct. But I just want to be clear that it is an 11%. I don't want anyone to think that I'm misleading anyone. It is an 11% increase over the set salary for fiscal year 25.
So the prior salary column would have been more in the 74 range, 74.5 or something, right?
Correct.
And then you add the 2% to get, so that was artificially reduced from 74,000 to 69 because inexperience. And then that's how you're getting back to the 77 now.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, sounds fair. Do we know what other surrounding town clerks, what their salaries are?
I have not done the research primarily because I have no authority over her contract or her
Okay.
salary. But in my conversations with her and reviewing the warrant article, she says that this is in line with neighboring communities. I have no reason to not agree, to not believe that's the case. 77 certainly seems to be, that is definitely within the range of the salaries that we're paying department heads that are in union positions here at Town Hall.
Yeah, I was going through that information you sent out, Colin, and I noticed that they're all in the 70s. So this sounds like it's right on spot there, spot on.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 7 as written.
Second,
Okay, any further discussion on Article 7? Hearing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? That'll go. Unanimous.
Excellent. Just one second here.
What the hell?
All right. Moving along to Article 8. Article 8 is a transfer of funds from free cash. Again, in full transparency, free cash is not free. It's tax money that was not expected to be collected or that was appropriated but not spent. So it represents essentially a surplus, if you will. There are 4 items that appear on this year's free cash warrant. One is $52,500 to fund the Other Post-Employment Benefit Trust Fund. This is a trust fund that the town established many years ago, as did every other municipality, to help us meet our long-term retirement funding. This trust fund is meant to be a kind of backstop, if you will, for difficult years if we experienced a lot of retirements in one particular year. 3 or 4 years ago, we brought in an actuarial firm to conduct an analysis of our retirement liabilities, and it was determined that an annual contribution of $52,500 would be what we needed to carry us out beyond the expected retirement ages of the staff at that snapshot in time. So every year since then, we have been pretty good about meeting the $52,500. The school department will we are proposing a $189,000 transfer to the school department. This money is really owed to the school department. We're getting those Medicaid reimbursements as a result of expenses incurred by the school department. So this is just the accounting mechanism to return the money to the appropriate place.
Okay.
The compensated absence fund, we're seeking a transfer of $23,500. The compensated absence fund is a fund that was established by the select board and town meeting several years ago to help us meet unbudgeted and unplanned costs of payouts to some of our more senior employees, particularly in public safety. Up until the mid 2000s, many of our public safety contracts included generous sick time buyouts when they retired. Any employee hired after 2012 doesn't have that same benefit, but we've done a really great job of retaining great employees. And so we do still have a handful of public safety employees who in the next 3 to 4 years will retire and will be eligible for a much larger than normal payout. We do not budget those payouts in the operating budget simply because you don't know when to expect them. And so the compensated absence fund allows us to make mid-year transfers from that fund to their department's salary and wages line items to cover those. So a great example is earlier this fiscal year, our longtime police chief retired. He was entitled to a substantial sick time payout. We didn't budget it, but after we made the payout, we were able to tap into the compensated absence fund to cover the difference. The compensated absence fund is hovering around $12,000 right now, and so $23,500 will put us back in what I think to be the most comfortable place for what our remaining liabilities are. Eventually, we won't need to fund the compensated absence fund because, again, employees hired after 2012 don't have that same benefit. And then finally, $50,000 for the Finance Committee's reserve fund. This is an annual item we used to include in the operating budget, but last year was the second year that we included it as a free cash appropriation. The Finance Committee Reserve Fund is under the control of this body and can only be used for extraordinary or unforeseen expenditures with approval of the Finance Committee. In my time in Tyngsborough, we have never tapped into the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. However, a great example of when it would be helpful, this year we had a relatively new dump truck in the DPW breakdown mid-season. If we were going to repair it, it would have cost us about $47,000. That's not something that's budgeted in any of our department's budgets. So this would have allowed us to go to the Finance Committee, ask for the appropriation, and not have to wait for a new town meeting. Any money that's not spent from the reserve fund just becomes part of next year's free cash. So in fiscal 25, you have not touched the Finance Committee Reserve Fund. It will become part of free cash again.
Great.
Hey, Colin, on that first line, what are the other post-employment benefit? What types of benefits are we talking here?
This is largely insurance, life insurance, and health insurance.
And is that for life?
Yes.
Okay,
There are reducing degrees, obviously, but yes, it's a long-term commitment.
got it. Okay.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 8 as written.
Second,
Any further discussion on Article 8? Okay, all in favor of Article 8, please signify by saying aye.
aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, that is unanimous in favor.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Article 9 is the borrowing article to see if the town will vote to raise, appropriate, and borrow the sum of $487,863. That's for two projects. I'll start with the Police Department exterior building envelope improvements. This was included in the Capital Asset Management Committee's fiscal year 26 recommended plan. Also has been presented to this group before. $187,863 is the dollar amount that we need to address the critical items on the police department's exterior envelope. So earlier this fiscal year, the select board authorized the use of our remaining ARPA funds to conduct a full facilities assessment of both our police and fire departments. That's because over the last 5 years, we've been talking about the possibility of constructing a new police and or fire station. And so we avoided spending substantial amounts of capital. What is clear is that the town cannot in the near future afford to construct two new buildings or a combined one. And so the board, realizing that we needed to make sure these buildings continued to last, brought in an architectural firm. What they produced was a 5-year capital plan that ranked the issues of each building based on priority and provided order of magnitude cost estimates. The good news is this 187, that estimate was just provided to us in late fall. So these are relatively current prices. And it will allow us to address things like windows, the structural foundation, roof bracing, as well as some siding issues. The first item in the borrowing article is up to $300,000 to hire an architectural firm to conduct a schematic design of a new fire station. This is something that the select board has talked about quite a bit. I won't repeat the last part I just said, but what has become abundantly clear is that while both buildings need to be replaced and while both departments have outgrown their buildings, there exists a real critical need on the fire side, particularly around life safety. I won't rehash the whole discussion, but folks could rewatch a January select board meeting when this issue was discussed. Right now, because of the size of our station and its age, it's impossible for us to appropriately separate what's called hot zones versus cold zones. So when a firefighter returns to the station from a fire, they're generally have been exposed to hazardous materials. And in a perfect world, you are stepping into a hot zone where the hazardous materials have been exposed and going into a cold zone, which is your office space, living areas. We don't have that separation right now simply because of the size of the building. So this schematic design will allow us to conduct a design of a building. It will give us a firm idea of how much we'd be looking at to construct the building. Now, we haven't put pen to paper, if you will, on locking down a site, but what we did do is, with the help of an architectural firm and our fire chief, we identified the Winslow School property as the most advantageous site for a new fire station. However, a schematic design can be plopped down on any parcel of land that's big enough. So I know that there's still some lingering conversations about what to do with the Winslow School. A yes vote on the schematic design does not seal the fate of the Winslow School. In fact, as a part of our assessment of that site, we have confirmed with the architectural firm that while our ideal location on the site would require the demolition of the Winslow School, it could fit on the site without touching the Winslow School. And I say all of that to say that all we'll have at the end of this project is a schematic design that, when residents feel comfortable that they can pay for construction, will be able to narrow down a site. Both of these are not to exceed. So while there's a dollar amount listed here, we are not guaranteed to spend all of that money. A great example, in October, town meeting authorized up to $900,000 for a fire truck. We ended up spending $720,000. And so we only borrow the dollar amount that we need.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 9 as written.
Second.
Perfect. Any discussion?
No.
Okay, all in favor of Article 9, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstain. That goes unanimously, Colin.
Fantastic. Moving right along to Article 10. Article 10 is the appropriation for the Ambulance Enterprise Fund for fiscal year 26. There are two enterprise funds that you'll see on this warrant, conveniently right next to each other. An enterprise fund is an account that is generated by business type activities. So in this case, the Ambulance Enterprise Fund is self-sustaining in that all of its expenses are covered by the revenue generated. So through ambulance billing, insurance payments, etc. This year's total Ambulance Enterprise Fund, this is the cost to operate the ambulance service, is $689,540. Not that it matters for the purposes of this article, but the Ambulance Enterprise Fund is trending in the black again this year for what would be the second full year in a row. These dollar amounts are not included in the general fund because they are not supported by the local revenue that we talked about earlier.
That's good. That's good. It's a positive cash flow.
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 10 as written.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, did someone have something?
No.
Oh, okay. All in favor of Article 10, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, that's good unanimously.
Fantastic. Sticking with that theme, Article 11 is the Sewer Enterprise Fund. Similar to the Ambulance Enterprise Fund, the entire operation of our sewer division of the Department of Public Works is funded by revenue generated by the sewer service. So that's user fees, it's betterments, and they also have far more retained earnings, which is their version of free cash, than the Ambulance Enterprise Fund has. Even under the DPW Act, the budget of the sewer division remains under the authority of the 3-member elected sewer commission. This year's budget is $3,744,728.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 11 as written.
Second.
Any discussion on Article 11? Okay, all in favor of Article 11, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain. That is, we are for that unanimously, Colin.
Fantastic. Moving along to Article 12. Article 12 is similar, except this is technically called a reserve for appropriation. doesn't really matter for the purposes of this conversation. But this is transfer of funds from the PEG fund to cover the operations of the PEG department, which is our media department. The total amount is $159,687. This covers the staff and expenses to operate Tyngsborough Media, which is who will post this video, who records all of our public meetings. This money comes directly from a surcharge that Tyngsborough residents pay on your internet bill, on your cable bills. So if you look closely, there's a surcharge that Comcast and Verizon charge, and they give that back to the town to fund these various programs. So it's technically different than an enterprise fund, but it operates relatively similar.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 12 as written.
Second.
Second.
Okay, perfect. Discussion? All in favor of Article 12, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? We're good with Article 12. Colin?
Fantastic. Article 13 is appropriation from the Community Preservation Fund. This year, there's really only two items on here that aren't housekeeping items. One is $3,500 to fund Lake Massapog weed control, and one is $20,000 for a sonar weed treatment on Lake Muscuppick. Both of these typically appear on here in various amounts. Also included in the appropriation is $35,000 for administrative expenses. You are technically allowed to go up to 5%. In prior years, we've allocated $50,000 and not used it, so I'm just dropping it down to be a little bit more realistic. We're also in year 5 of the debt service for the First Parish Meeting House, totaling $226,375. And that is not DEB service, that should be debt service for the Old Town Hall. That's year 8 out of 10, so we're getting close to being done with that. That's totaling $181,500. Every year, the CPC is required to deposit a certain amount into the 3 reserves. One is for historic preservation, one is for affordable housing, and one is for open space. Every year, we deposit $100,000 into each. This article was unanimously recommended by the Community Preservation Committee at a meeting they had last month.
Hey.
Hey, Colin, what is that administrative expenses that receipts 35K? What is
Sure.
that?
Great question. That allows the CPC to hire specialists if they're looking at a project. A great example is the Historical Commission has asked CPC to reallocate $1.2 million to fully restore the Winslow School. The CPC noted that there really wasn't any firm cost estimates. And so in order to hire a firm to do that kind of work, you could use the CPC administrative expenses. It could technically pay for staff support to do meeting minutes, but since I attend the meetings anyway, I do it because I'm there. But those are non-project related, kind of think of the things that help the committee stay operational.
Okay, thank you.
And they still require a vote of CPC. It's not like I can just go spend the $35,000. CPC still controls the.
Got it.
So basically, like another way you can also explain, so I've been on CPC now for probably 15, 16 years. So if a project comes in, we've had it before where somebody wants to sell a parcel of land to the town. And we have to, by law, have an appraisal to make sure the value is, that we're paying fair market value, not over fair market value. And sometimes these surveys or appraisals cost anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. Without this money, we would have to wait to have it appropriated at a town meeting, which is every 6 months. So this gives us the flexibility to go after certain parcels of land, small projects, any things like that. And then once we have that appraisal, then we can submit that to the town, that we have an appraisal if we're gonna, go ahead and purchase the properties.
Okay, makes sense. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks, Ed.
You're welcome. Mr. Chair, I can make a motion to recommend Article 13 as written.
Second.
Perfect. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of Article 13, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Colin, we are 413 unanimously.
Fantastic. Moving right along to Article 14, approve prior year bills. There's a law in Massachusetts that prevents a municipality from paying bills that were incurred in a prior fiscal year using the current fiscal year budget, unless it has approval from town meeting. So what you see here is 2 invoices, one for $420 from KP Law, which was our labor council, and one for $195 from Toshiba. This is a copier lease in the library. Town meeting is required to approve that we pay those funds. Important to note that although they are dollar amounts listed here, we would be using fiscal year 25's budget. So Article 14 isn't an additional appropriation. It's simply saying you can use your current budget to pay a prior year bill.
Recommend to move Article 14.
I'll second.
Perfect. And I assume no discussion on this one. So all in favor of Article 14, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 14, we are for that unanimously.
Tremendous. Moving right along to Article 15. Article 15 is a street acceptance for two roads, Riverbend Road and Failing Street. This is a process required in order to take what was previously a private way and make it a public way. Under Massachusetts laws, you are not allowed to use public resources for road maintenance on private ways. So plowing these streets is technically not permissible. Sanding them is not permissible. Certainly maintaining them is not permissible. The Sewer Commission has received, although because a continuing resolution wasn't approved in time, they have to reapply, but they are in line to receive federal funding to design a sewer expansion, which would cover these two streets. However, we can't install utilities on a private way. So this article seeks town meeting approval to accept these two relatively small but very unique roads as public ways. The select board held a public hearing on March 24th in which residents were invited to come and share their concerns or opposition. And following that meeting, they recommended that it move forward to town meeting. The acceptance of these two streets simply means that they'll now become public ways. There are no plans to reconstruct those streets, and in all reality, it will be status quo over there until such a time when there is funding existing to install sewer utilities.
So Colin, are these roads, are they just residential or are they condominiums? Are they, what's on these roads?
They are all single family homes, so it's not, we are certainly not accepting a like private development. What it is
Okay.
they were all built before, really, I like to say that anything before 1990, we didn't have strong processes within the planning realm of the town. We didn't have an engineering department. So developers would come in, propose things, they'd build the houses, and then they'd walk away without building the streets to code, without making sure that they were accepted. So over the last 5 or 6 years, we've accepted probably up to 12 single family home residential streets that were always intended to be public ways, but that we never actually accepted.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Yelligan, make a motion to recommend Article 15 as written.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of Article 15, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Article 15, we are for that unanimously.
Excellent. 1 second. All right. Article 16. Article 16 seeks town meeting adoption of a local option statute, which before I talk about the substance of this particular law, in Massachusetts, because nothing is simple, there are laws and then there are local option statutes. A local option statute is basically an optional law that a municipality can choose to accept. Generally, it involves things like how a municipality operates. It's certainly not talking about like crimes. In this case, this is otherwise known as the HEROES Act. So Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 59, Section 5C would allow the town to provide for exemptions on real estate and personal property tax bills of up to 100% of the allowable exception for veterans, seniors, and I think the other exemption category is for blind individuals. The Board of Assessors spent a lot of time looking at this particular section. And if you give me 1 second, I can pull up the dollar amount. An exemption does not reduce the revenue that a town takes in. What it does do is it shifts that burden from one class of taxpayers to another. So we will still collect the same amount of revenue regardless of if Article 16 passes. Just 1 second here. I just want to make sure I all right. So
Personal exception.
Second. So what this will do, based on, we use the data of our current residents that are taking these exemptions, which are essentially discounts on a real estate tax bill, to put it in simple terms. And there are qualifying ways you get there. The one that this focuses on is for veterans or surviving spouses. By shifting the tax burden so that all categories of exemptions can be up to 100% of the maximum allowable exemption, the average taxpayer in Tyngsborough would see an $18 increase in their tax bill. But meanwhile, the benefit for the folks that are accepting it is much greater. So essentially, it's everybody coming together to provide discounts for certain classes of residents as outlined in this law. I certainly am not doing this explanation nearly as much justice as our chief assessor can do.
I think it's good. I like the concept. Has it been in place in the past, and now we're just adding a different class, like you say, veterans and surviving spouses? It's already been in effect prior years.
It's been in effect, but it was never, you could never go up to 100%. So it was always at a lower percentage, and it went up annually by the COLA, which wasn't substantial. Last year, the legislature passed what they called the HEROES Act, which allows a municipality to now go up to the 100%. So there is certainly a benefit for the classes I mentioned. There is an option for the town to only accept a portion of the law and apply it specifically to veterans. But the analysis that our assessor's office did was that it really didn't save the rest of the taxpayers any money to exclude those other classes. So they saw this proposal, as is presented to town meeting, as having the greatest impact across the community at the least impact for those that aren't eligible for an exemption.
What would be the dollar amount of the benefit someone would receive? It's not that material, is it?
I think that it is relatively, let's see.
And I'm thinking of property taxes, right? You get a bill for property taxes. How much do they get? How much relief do they get?
So there are 3 classes of exemptions. By doing this, one that used to be $400 now increases to $800. One that used to be $1,000 increases to $200,000, because we were previously at the 50%. So it is a pretty substantial annual benefit, depending on where you fall in that scale.
Right. I'm fine. I'm fine with it, frankly. So I make a motion to recommend.
I'm trying to figure out how I want to put that. Does this have anything to do with when seniors are working off their taxes?
No,
You know, if they do certain things in town and volunteer for things, and then they get something reduced, their taxes reduced?
no, that's a separate program.
That's separate program?
Mhm.
Okay. So this is like an additional one that's even gonna help them even more.
Correct. And make no
Oh,
mistake, it exists to some degree today. This is just allowing us to go up. Like I said, it's doubling for most people,
Okay,
but it does
I
not
think-
replace the senior tax work-off program.
okay. I think it's a good concept. Yeah.
So basically, a senior said, so over 65, average $2,000 a year off your taxes.
Correct.
I'm 63.
You're almost there.
You're a baby, Eddie, you're a baby.
And I will just note, I think I gave the basic summary, but at town meeting, we'll have our chief assessor and the chair of the Board of Assessors, who will certainly do a much better job than I did.
All right, thanks. Okay,
Michelle, I'd make a motion to recommend Article 16 as written.
Second.
Okay, any further discussion?
No.
So Colin, what's the maximum benefit someone would be able to get, if this goes through
The $2,000, which currently is $1,000
per year?
per year.
Per year, okay, 2,000 per year, Tony, okay.
Yeah, so how does that guideline, what is the guideline on the 2,000? So it's up to 2,000, correct?
There are two types of exemptions. One is currently at $400. This doubles it. One is at $1,000. There are a variety. You have to apply. It's not just automatically given to you, but you have to apply and meet the eligibility criteria, which I will admit I'm not fully familiar with.
Okay.
I guess just for the sake of clarity, is it some sliding scale or those are the amounts?
Those are the amounts,
Okay,
depending on what you qualify for.
yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? Any other questions? All right, hearing none. All in favor of Article 16, please signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Abstain? Good with Article 16, Colin?
Fantastic. All right, we're almost at the end. Article 17 is a zoning amendment, an amendment to the town's zoning bylaw, specifically section 11, which is our definitions. I want to note that this is a unique presentation of a zoning amendment because typically we would show new items in bold and we would show deleted items in strike through. However, of course, the zoning review committee picked a section that already had bold text. So prior to these changes, the titles of each definition appeared in bold. And so in order to differentiate between what existed and what is new, we're using the color red. We will have some copies printed that use italics so that folks that have difficulty seeing colors will know what the differences are. But essentially, this was the last step of the zoning review committee's work. That's a committee that's been around for 3 years now, using state technical assistance money, has worked with a professional zoning consultant to update and codify our zoning bylaw. The last 2 years, they did a bulk of that work. And at the beginning of this fiscal year, we realized that there were some additional funds left in that grant. And so we decided that one of the most outdated but kind of low-hanging fruits was our definition section. So all this does here is update definitions to match common definitions in our neighboring communities. It'll help us stay more competitive on a business front. We also updated definitions to match statutory language. So if a law has changed since we did our zoning bylaws, we've updated it. And we provided some clarity. The one I keep pointing out is we had a definition for, quote, slaughterhouses and similar. And I don't know if any of you can tell me what is similar to a slaughterhouse that's not a slaughterhouse. So no substantive changes here. I think that this is simply trying to make it easier for developers, for the planning board, the zoning board of appeals, and our building commissioner. The planning board is required by law to hold a public hearing on zoning amendments. They did that earlier in March, and they voted unanimously to recommend this item to town meeting.
The chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 17 as written.
Second.
Any further discussion on Article 17? Okay, all in favor of Article 17, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Colin, Article 17 is going to be unanimous.
Fantastic. As I
gosh.
scroll through a million pages here,
Yeah.
the final two articles, Article 18 and Article 19, are both tied to FEMA flood maps. So as with every municipality in Massachusetts, our bylaws reference floodplains and maps that are outlined by FEMA. Every 5 years, FEMA updates those. And even though the updates they made to ones impacting Tyngsborough are non-substantial, there were a handful of edits that we needed to make simply to match the language that they're using in the new flood map. So this doesn't change anything about zoning. It doesn't add new regulations. It doesn't remove regulations. It simply updates our bylaw to match the FEMA promulgated floodplain language. So Article 18 focuses on section 10.2, the wetlands district, which again, bold red, that shows new text. You can see here, it's just adding new processes that the town has to follow. So very little impact on developers. Article 19, if we can take them both together just because they're the same, is the same concept, but focused on section 10.3, the floodplain and floodway districts. Again, here, it's just clarifying the name of the map and the dates that the maps were updated. Similar to Article 17, the planning board held a public hearing on these matters in March, and they voted unanimously to recommend them to town meeting.
Okay, that seems pretty straightforward.
Mhm. Yep, I agree.
So we're going to handle 18 and 19 together, Colin? Is that,
If you are willing to, absolutely.
Right.
Motion to accept Articles 18 and 19 as written.
Second.
Any further discussion? on
Yeah, I
18
would just
or
say to
19?
all residents, if your, mortgage company makes you put flood insurance on your house and you don't think the floodplain maps from FEMA are correct, which is a lot, when FEMA, we do the maps in this town, a lot of them are wrong. So don't go by what your insurance says, don't go by what FEMA says, don't trust their maps, they're not accurate. That happened to myself and a few other people that all of a sudden they told my bank that I needed flood insurance. I fought it and it cost me $2,000 to have a company come out and do the floodplain maps. And they proved that FEMA was wrong on my property and it saved me $5,000 in flood insurance. So don't go by the FEMA maps. I don't trust them. No, it's scary because then they'll all of a sudden send you a bill saying you're gonna pay an extra $4,000 for flood insurance on your house. And I had to hire a civil engineer to redo the maps and show that my house was not in a floodplain.
It's good info, Ed. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of 18 and 19, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Colin, we're good to go with those last two.
Fantastic. Before you motion to adjourn, just a quick reminder for folks that might watch this later. Pre-town meeting will take place on Tuesday, April 29th at 6 p.m. here at Town Hall. Town meeting is on Tuesday, April 6th at 7 p.m. at the elementary school. And at some point tomorrow, all of these articles will be posted on the town's website with explanations and the votes of Finance Committee and the Select Board.
I think you said, Colin, I think you said April 6th town meeting, May 6th, you mean?
May
May 6th.
6th, correct. May 6th. April 29th for pre-town meeting, May 6th for town meeting.
You got it.
Okay, thank you.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.